And Representative Amy Loudenbeck and her Democratic challenger Ryan Schroeder join me now. First of all, thanks to both of you for taking the time to join us today. And I want to start with you, Representative. You came into office November 2010. Of course, the election that brought Scott Walker into office, a wave of Republicans into the Assembly as well. You're representing a chunk of Rock County, including a part of Janesville. And you can see that unemployment, obviously a big issue in that part of the state. And the drumbeat on creating jobs is really a big issue. They're trickling in. We're starting to see some growth in the real estate market, the housing, some positive signs in Rock County. But in the short term, what can we do in this state, you specifically, to kind of open that faucet and change the job growth from a trickle to really gushing more jobs in that part of the state?
I think we're seeing progress. Some of the initiatives that we put forward in the last session led to the creation of 3,500 jobs this year in Rock County. And moving forward, I think that businesses want a sense of certainty with regards to what to expect with regulations and government. And then another critical issue in that area is the workforce skills gap. And I have been working several different angles to try to address that particular issue.
Mr. Schroeder, you care to respond? And how would you attack that and kind of get the jobs going if elected?
I agree with that. I've had my experience and background is 12 years on the Delavan City Council, and actually, out of all those 3 districts in the city limits, I represent the one that's got the most industry and business. So I've often worked over the years with different stakeholders, and I think that's what we need to do. We need to work with our chambers, work with the different stakeholders. I think one thing that I certainly disagree with what we saw in the last legislative session was the funding cuts that we saw to our technical schools and to our public education. I think it starts there. We hear, and I've heard personally, that businesses want to come here when they have a skilled, educated workforce. And for me, and a difference I think between myself and my opponent are that I think we both care about education overall, but for me it's a priority to make sure that we have the resources at our tech schools and at our public schools, and in tough times not to take that funding away and give to other alternatives.
Well, Representative Loudenbeck, technical college funding cut by 30% in the last biennial budget, $36 million each year at a time. A lot of people trying to obviously train, a lot of those GM workers going through the tech school system down there to retrain, find new jobs. How does that fit into the jobs economy, taken away from those tech schools at the same time we're trying to get more people into them?
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, I'm working on 3 things related to workforce development. One of them is encouraging Blackhawk Technical College and Gateway Technical College to work together to provide some of the high investment type of training that is needed, meaning robotics, automation, CNC setup. There's a lot of equipment and a lot of building that is needed in order to provide those things, and both of those systems are trying to do that. And it's interesting with redistricting to learn more about the 2 counties and what they have in common, and try to reach solutions so that we can provide those services. Also, 92% of workforce development training money is provided by the federal government. And I recently sent a letter to the Secretary of Workforce Development asking to request a federal waiver so that federal funds can be used for incumbent worker training, so that maybe there's someone at an entry-level job in a company where they're loyal, they have an aptitude, they can use the money to train that person up to the next level, opening up a job for someone else that might be at an unskilled or low-skilled level. It's called career laddering, and that's really a demand-driven solution where you're not just trying to train everyone to fill each unique position. You're giving more control to the worker and to the company as far as how to fill those gaps.
Mr. Schroeder, you mentioned your role on the Delavan City Council, the governor's hometown, of course, as many know. What at the local level, as you have observed as a municipal worker, what can the state do? We've seen municipalities get their state funding cut. What can the state do to help those local municipalities? What needs to be done? What could you see to be done if elected to help that cause?
I think that's a great question, and you're exactly right. That's been my experience. Every year, I've served 11 out of 12 years on the City Council on the Finance Committee, and every year has gotten tougher and tougher to shore up our local budgets. And one thing that I've talked about in this campaign and continue to, and we'll look at should I be fortunately elected in November, is the unfunded mandates that the state has handed down onto local municipalities. I know we reviewed that at the local level about 11 years ago at the city level. I think, again, this is a difference between myself and my opponent in this race, is that there's different priorities. And for me, we've had a partnership between the state and the local levels of government for a very, very long time with state shared revenues. And so cutting that, pulling the rug out from under our local elected officials, I mean, we've heard it, we both have heard it in this campaign, I know, whether it's rural townships and the roads, a lot of that cooperation has been underfunded for a very long time. So I think we can do more. I certainly recognize that it's tough for all of us, and we can do better. And it gets back to when we look at some of the places that we've given big, large corporation tax cuts and lost some revenues coming in that, quite frankly, I disagree with, we'd have more revenues to have some of these other alternative areas where we've had relationships in the past, and we can do better.
Oh, Representative Loudenbeck, Mr. Schroeder just touched on some differences between you and he in this race. What do you see as some of the fundamental differences? Why should people vote for you over him, for example?
Well, I think I've shown that I am a leader in the Assembly, and I have the respect of my constituents as a resource and as an advocate. I've also honored my campaign promises of trying to balance the state budget without raising taxes, and also focus on economic development. And those are the things that I want to continue to do, and I want to use the knowledge that I have gained in the last 2 years to continue building on some of the bills. I had a few bills that I'd like to bring forward next year that didn't have time to get considered. And also, I think I can do, I think I have even more ideas to add. And so I think that I have done.
What are some of those measures that you plan to get in that you couldn't get in this last cycle?
Okay. I had a bill. I worked on it with a Democratic representative that was on Representative Louis Milewski. He was on the Assembly Jobs Committee. And about midway through the session, we realized that we both saw a need for a small business ombudsman position within state government. There's about 16 different divisions and agencies that a new or expanding business would have to work for in state government. So to have a dedicated position within Wisconsin government that would be a resource for those people, help them kind of reach out to the other agencies, get a punch list of what they needed to do so that they weren't constantly saying, well, I got this permit, but I didn't know I needed that one, and try to really make that process more streamlined for them. I think going back, we'd probably try to limit that a little bit for as far as what size is a business and how much resources we could provide, and work out some details, but I'd like to see that come forward. I also had a bill that was not introduced, but I was in drafting, and it's somewhat of a workforce TIF, where if a company provided training to an incumbent worker, again, this incumbent worker training that seems to really be key. If a company was able to train someone and get them into a new position where they earned a higher wage, they would take that incremental payroll tax and put it back into a training fund that could continually be used. Similar to what the TIFs are that we use for economic development now, where you're trying to find money when resources are scarce. So those are two bills that I'd like to see come forward next session.
Well, Mr. Schroeder, obviously one of the big issues the last couple of years was collective bargaining, and there's people out there that want to have this debate brought up again. Obviously, the court systems are having an impact on it right now. But what is your viewpoint on that? Do you think it is a settled issue and it's time to move on, or is it something that needs to be revisited if you're elected?
Well, first of all, I think it's far from being settled, and I think it is something that we need to revisit and address. I think I found, and I think many others did from the very beginning, that how is it that you ask just certain people within the working workforce to give? I think we need to ask all. There's nothing wrong with asking everyone to be a part of the solution, and we've heard that from the administration, to ask everyone to be a part of the solution, but yet we've seen some of the politicizing and divisiveness towards certain segments. And so I thought, as well did other people, that it was going to be found unconstitutional, that if you're not asking everyone to be a part of the solution and give up some of their pensions and things of that nature, how can you ask certain working class people? But could I go back to the question as far as what maybe, because I think it's very fair to show what maybe makes myself a better candidate than my opponent.
Sure,
go ahead. An opportunity. And I want to talk about my 12 years of experience at the local level. I think I've often led, and I've worked together with different stakeholders. One particular instance of that was working with environmental groups and small businesses to ban the use of phosphorus fertilizers in our city limits, recognizing that we knew that it's a very high tourism area in that area, and that we need clean water areas and lakes and streams. So that was before we had a statewide ban, and it wasn't easy to necessarily bring some of these smaller businesses to the table and environmental groups, and we hammered that out. And I think that shows real leadership at a time where it's not always easy. You can sometimes follow or rubber stamp some of these things, and my record shows that over the 12 years. I think one of the things that I've often done as a local elected official is bring transparency, openness, a better understanding of what our local government is about, and I think certainly we're not seeing that at the state level. In fact, it's been unfortunate that we've had more not only divisiveness types of issues, but how this district even came about to begin with. There was not a lot of any public participation from the people that we're elected to represent. And I know I brought it up in this campaign in the past, but my opponent and some of her colleagues actually signed secret pledges looking at this district before the public had an opportunity. And again, I worked hard at the local level to make sure that we would show our local meetings on cable access. When that wasn't enough, because we knew that not everyone had cable, then to streamline those council meetings online. And I think, so again, I stand for more transparency, and I'm used to representing all of the people, because it's
let me allow Representative Loudenbeck to answer that, because he's talking about secret signatures and stuff like that, and not allowing the public to respond to the redistricting debate. How do you view that? And then I also want to give you the opportunity to answer the collective bargaining debate. But first, on the redistricting, how do you view that?
As you know, our Wisconsin Constitution requires the districts to be equal populations, contiguous and compact. That is what constitutes a legal map. And that is what I was given the opportunity to vote on. As far as what maps were made available to the public, those were the same maps that I saw when I was shown what my district would look like. The process included one meeting with an attorney and an attorney-client privilege document, which is really pretty standard when you're talking about a meeting with a law firm. And other than that, the process was, my vote was based on what I thought constituted a legal map.
Okay. We could go on and on and on, but let's get back to the collective bargaining debate, because is this settled? Do you expect this to be, if you're reelected, an issue that comes to the floor again?
Depending on what happens in the court, it's something that may come to the floor again. I think that as far as some of the comments that were made previously about the cuts to shared revenue, I mean, I think that the legislature recognized that putting forward cuts to shared revenue or school funding, there needed to be some ways to offset some of those reductions in funds. And so looking at the pension contribution and the healthcare contribution, and even the ability to negotiate your healthcare provider. For example, in my school district in Clinton, just negotiating a new healthcare provider was enough to offset the costs of the healthcare provider, and the pension was enough to offset the costs of that were reduced in their shared revenue. Other states require pension contributions. We were one of very few that weren't collecting that contribution, and in fact, other states require even a higher level of contribution. And so, as far as my position on, do I think that the reforms that were put in place are something that I continue to stand behind? My answer would be yes.
Well, thank you very much. I know this is obviously a discussion we could continue. I wish we had more time, but I appreciate both of you coming here to join us today to discuss the issues in your district. Thanks again for your time. Best of luck to both of you in November.